political scientists still do. And if I can tell you just a short story, I went to a conference some years ago, Black Political Scientists Conference. I did a paper on postmodernism, it was a critique. And my typical self, I don't start in Europe. I'm evaluating Black political thought and behavior. Europe has no space for me in terms of how I evaluate Black political thought and behavior. I'm using, as I said, the values, ideas, and concepts that evolve out of Black people's history and culture. Oh, by the way, I didn't point out, what are those values and ideas? Freedom, self-determination, social justice, equality, education, resistance, unity. And so if we think of, as a metaphor, as I said, even if we start in 1619, even though I'm an advocate for going into Africa, but I'm using 1619 to make a point. If we just start with 1619 and think of the Black freedom movement as a river, one can observe those values and ideas. How do we demonstrate it? You look at the tributaries, you look at the individuals, you look at Sojourner Truth, you look at Harriet Tubman, you look at Frederick Douglass, you look at David Walker, you look at all the slave revolts as events. You look at the many movements, anti-slavery movement, abolitionist movement, Black Power movement, anti-lynching movement, Black Lives Matter movement. You can look at organizations, NAACP, Nation of Islam, all of them. These are the tributaries. And one can observe in their work, whether it's their speeches, their action work, you can observe freedom, self-determination, equality. You can observe these values in Black people's history and culture. So thinking of Black as a metaphor again, is the metaphor is to make the point about these values and ideas evolving in Black people's history and culture. Black political scientists tragically are not explicit about this. Okay? Let me go back a little bit more and make a point about going back to Black politics as a field of study is approximately 40 years old. As a matter of fact, 2019, it was in 1969 that Matt Jones, a Black political scientist, in an effort to conceptualize this new field of study, is 40 years old today, in this year. 1969 was a pivotal year. Matt Jones wrote a letter it's called A Note from a Black Political Scientist. There was only a handful of Black political scientists in the American Political Science Association. So Matt Jones and a cadre, what I call insurgent intellectuals, said we need to break away from the APSA and form our own institution. They formed the National Conference of Black Political Scientists. And in that two-page statement, he made an argument for what Black political scientists need to do to break away from the Europeanization of the consciousness of Black intellectuals. And he called for Black political scientists to develop a Black worldview. Okay? A Black worldview. And he said his contention was that the problem that Black political scientists have is that they are enamored with the white worldview. That is, European conceptions of reality. And in being enamored with the European conceptions of reality, they end up being unusually careful to steer clear of critically challenging its predominance in structuring social reality. Furthermore, he said, in acquiescing to European conceptions of reality or white conceptions of reality, the Black intellectual invariably interprets and defines concepts like progress and responsibilities in terms of white interests, notwithstanding the militant rhetoric that might be coming from those intellectuals. Okay? Worldviews, according to Matt Jones, encompass the consciously normative assumptions of social science inquiry that in turn engender theories, paradigms, and ideologies. Furthermore, he says, worldviews inhabit a unique cultural space wherein a people or culture continually replenish their views on the nature of judgment and value, which is axiology, on the nature of being and reality, which is ontology, on the nature of knowing, epistemology, and on questions of action, which would be in practice, what we call praxology. The point Mac Jones is making is that there is a black worldview. The black intellectual, tragically, hasn't been careful to articulate what that worldview is. And failure to do so means that black political scientists end up being oriented by default to the white worldview. The white, in whatever country you're in, the worldview is a reflection of the dominant group. So in the United States, the worldview by default is the white worldview. It doesn't have to be articulated, although it is in our educational system. It's based on the Greek model. Pick any discipline, and they're going to point to a Greek. Okay? Pick a discipline. I'm in political science. It's Plato. You go to medicine. Who is it in medicine? When you come out of medicine, right? Pick them. It's always a Greek figure. It's what we call the Greek model. So the American educational system is based on the Greek model. And it's pretty much unchallenged. It's pretty much unchallenged. And this is one of the problems with black political scientists. So I have tussles, quarrels with my colleagues, because for me, I do black politics, and for me, if I'm doing black politics, again, as a metaphor, for me, the history and culture of black people provide me with the substance to evaluate black politics, that is, with the lowercase p, black political thought, black political behavior. And we're still, and by the way, it's even worse today than coming out of the 1960s. Coming out of the 1960s, we had there was a chance to flee the intellectual plantation, if you will, to make a Tubman-Douglas move. You know, Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass both escaped. Intellectuals today, 40 years post the development of black politics, is even worse today. And I've experienced some of these challenges. Part of it is, if you ask the question, well, why is it so challenging today? Well, most black intellectuals work at white universities. And usually, if you take the political science departments, there's usually one person or two persons max. I taught at the University of Connecticut for 10 years before coming to Howard. I got my PhD here and got my first teaching job up there. I was the first person they hired. I couldn't believe it. I didn't know that until I got there. I was told, you're the first. I'm like, what? But what I'm saying to you all here today is the way I behaved up there. So the challenge that black intellectuals have in those spaces, usually they're only one. And you can't imagine being the only one struggling against the academic and intellectual hegemony. Because if you go, it's like, what I'm saying is that black political scientists need to stand in their own space, their own historical and cultural space. They need to step out. This is what Mac Jones is arguing. Pretty much we're in the default space, European history and culture. And Mac Jones says if black political scientists are going to contribute to the black freedom movement, they have to step out of that space. They gotta go and they have to get into their own space. If you're at a white university, that's a very difficult proposition, because your colleagues are the ones who determine how fast you progress in your career. And the publishing outlets decide whether or not they want to publish you. The promotion decisions are made on these types of things. So they don't have to tell you outright. They just send subtle signs to you. Don't go down that road. And these are the kind of experiences I had when I was at UConn. But for some reason, I had read this book called Urugu, and I was like, you know what? I know there are more obstacles, but I made my decision. And people were concerned about me. Why are you doing that? You're not going to get tenure. This is the road I'm traveling. And this is why black intellectuals today, they're not standing in their own space. Don't be confused. If they're studying the subject matter, that is, black people who are doing politics, whether thinking it or acting it, that's not, in my estimation, that's not black politics. It becomes black politics if I'm using the values, ideas, and concepts that evolve out of black people's history and culture to evaluate a Clarence Thomas or Martin Luther King. Then my evaluation, in my estimation, is spot on. If I use resistance and freedom and self-determination to evaluate Clarence Thomas, my critique is going to be much more profound because I'm using black values and ideas to evaluate him. I'm not using Thomas Jefferson. I'm not using Hegel to evaluate him. You may be right. In fact, Clarence Thomas sees himself coming out of that tradition. Right? And the confusion is that they get away with it because of the phenotype. And we get confused in the process. Because, well, he's black. Well, haven't you heard that there's such thing as what some scholars have argued? There's different ways of saying it, but essentially you could be black in skin color, but your value orientation is white. Okay? So this is why we can easily be duped simply by looking strictly at the skin color. Another important point to make about the meaning of black politics, if we think, in addition to what I've already said, black politics is a power struggle. It's a power struggle between whites and blacks, primarily, with whites in the dominant position, and whites in the dominant position, blacks in the subordinate position. The context of black lives in the United States has always been one of white domination, black subordination, whether it's the enslavement period, the Jim Crow period, or in the contemporary period. Just because we have civil rights and voting rights doesn't mean we're not dominated. Another confusion. Right? People will fuss at you. We're free now. We got voting rights. We got civil rights. There's no more white racism. Right? What's his name? Shelley Steele wrote an op-ed piece in the New York Times some years ago saying white supremacy has ended. That's telling black folks to stop complaining about racism in the United States. So when the police kill somebody, they come out with a latest, well, they shouldn't have had a hoodie on. Right? These are crazy comments about the experiences that people are having. But the black conservatives are making precisely that point. There are terms like deracialization, and when Obama ran the first time, there was another concept called post-racial. Those of us who are old enough to remember know that concept very well. Post-racial always meant, it never meant post-white, post-Asian, post-French, post any other group in the world. It always meant post-black. And I remember, because I was complaining during that period of time, this is a very dangerous concept. And this concept was almost being hoisted on us. And people were saying, I remember being in grocery line, checkout lines. And, the whole country was enthralled with Obama running for president. And I remember people I didn't know, whites I didn't know, basically telling me, you guys should be happy. Racism is over. We just elected a black person as president. Post-racial, no more race consciousness, no more, please leave us alone. We've arrived, right? Those of us who are old enough remember these discussions. They were telling us, you have arrived. Matt, what's his name? Matt Bai, B-A-I, he's a columnist. And he wrote for the New York Times. I think this piece appeared in the New York Times. He wrote a piece essentially, I can't remember the exact title, but it was post-racial. And he was telling us, essentially, get over it. Obama represents the new reality, post-racial. As I submit to you, it never meant post-white, post-French. It always meant post-black. It was aimed at black people. Get over it. We helped you elect the president. Please don't bother us with racism discussions anymore. Please don't use racial identity anymore. That's another one, this question of identity. Black people are constantly told, stop talking about identity politics. Identity is ubiquitous in politics. Everybody brings identity to politics. But people are essentially trying to tell us, get over this question of identity. Black identity. Sorry, that's what they really meant. Okay, so let me sort of wrap up by emphasizing this point again about, in terms of purpose. Again, the context is white domination, black subordination. Whites are generally engaged in behavior to maintain their dominance. Now, it doesn't mean all whites are engaging in it the same way. You have your white supremacy, your fanatical, extremist, terroristic whites, the kind that's on the rise today with Trump, who don't mind with their guns, and tragically, this fellow who just pled guilty, who ran over Heather Heyer last year in Charlottesville. Those types, those are the extreme types, okay? And then you have your dominant white groups, the ones who run the corporations. All of them are interested in maintaining whites at the top. They just don't go about it the same way. In fact, those at the very top will enlist the complicity of the dominant black groups. So our dominant black civil rights type groups, for example, also participate in this form of slow progress for blacks. Okay, so my point is, not all whites are engaged in the same type of activities to maintain their dominance, even though that's the objective. The same can be said for blacks as well. Not all blacks are engaged in the same type of activity trying to overthrow white domination. I'm excluding the black conservatives, y'all. They are what we call accommodationists. They're essentially telling blacks, do it by your own, pull your bootstraps up, one by one. Black conservatives? To the post-80s black conservatives, yes.
Because I'm thinking, when you say black conservatives, I think of people like Condoleezza Rice and Colin Powell, not like Candace Owens, who are...
Colin Powell is different. Yeah. Colin Powell, let me make a distinction here then. There's a distinction between black Republicans and black conservatives. The black conservatives, the Colin Powell types you're talking about, were always moderate. They supported things like affirmative action. Condoleezza Rice, I'm not quite sure about her. I think she's more on the conservative side.
Yeah, I don't.
Okay. The conservatives are a whole different breed. They're just like the white conservatives. They're that extreme. Okay, they don't give an inch. They condemn black. Part of what they do is bash black people.
Like Candace Owens.
Who's Candace Owens?
Oh my God. She is a young black conservative who is a very anti-illegal immigration claim. But
I'm gonna say yes to whoever that person is.
Yeah.
I know where you're going.
She just loves Trump, and her entire basis is.
Then,
the
I'm doubly agreeing with you,
yeah.
Since you mentioned Trump. Okay. Yeah, those are the post. I said post 1980 because in 1980 there was a conference held out in San Francisco. It's called the Fairmont Conference. This was as soon as Ronald Reagan was elected in November 1980. 2 months later, in December 1980, they organized this. Ed Meese, who was his chief of staff, organized this conference, big conference. They invited young black conservatives. Clarence Thomas was among them. And their strategy, it was explicit. This wasn't something they were hiding. It was explicit. They said, we want to create a new black leadership to replace the liberal civil rights black leadership. And this is how we're going to do it. We're going to sponsor these young black people. And they called them out to California, San Francisco. And after they left that conference, all of a sudden, They created all these, remember they had control of the executive branch of government, so they could dole out appointments. Clarence Thomas got 2, I know he got EEOC is one of them, who was the other one? Can't remember the other one. He got these high-level appointments. Their job was to tear down all those advances that were made in the 1960s.
Even though they benefited from them.
Absolutely, absolutely. Clarence Thomas went to Holy Cross and then Yale. Affirmative action.
Chris, I don't want to cut you off, but I wanted to open it up
Okay.
for the entire roundtable to engage in questions.
Okay, fantastic. Should we sit up here or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if the other members of the roundtable would come up, so we can engage in the question and answer portion. So please join me in thanking our presenters once again for an incredible roundtable. At this time, I thought we can open it up to about 15 minutes worth of questions, if you had any, from the great talks that we all heard. In addition to that, I've been told that any undergraduate student who dares to ask an amazing question will receive a free copy of the African Rhetoric Journal.
All right.
Go ahead. You had it up first.
When I walked in, when you were talking about the African diaspora and, these Afrocentric movements, and one thing you talked about was the one-drop rule. Do you think in any way that the one-drop rule was beneficial to these peoples due to that unification of Black people, no matter where they came from? Because when you look at it, Brazil's population is it's majority Black and mixed, but they don't have that unified state because a lot of them are I'm not negra, I'm pardo, I'm moreno. While during the civil rights movement, we were less than 10% of the population here in the United States, and we still had that unified, body of Black people fighting for one cause.
So, for everyone in the back, the question was, do we believe that the one-drop rule was beneficial for the conceptualization of Pan-African or African diasporic identity?
Hello. Hello. I think she deserves a book though. It's a great question. Yes, I think the one-drop rule, despite Black willingness, maybe, because this is something we won't ever know, right? We won't ever know if there were not the one-drop rule, how Black will claim that identity. We don't know that because the one-drop rule is there already, right? So what I know, I can say yes, is unify Black beyond even the expectation of white. Because don't forget what the one-drop rule comes. The one-drop rule comes from the purity of whiteness. We don't want to acknowledge those who are mixed. So one-drop rule, you have only one-drop rule from Black, then white. This was the purpose. The thing unify a fortiori, after the fact, they unify Black. So it's good on that way. And I think one path that they're trying to have in Latin America, for instance, is that path. They're trying to, there's a new census now in Latin America in the model of US, right? About, not based on one-drop rule, but they want people institutionally acknowledge is it Black or not. It's difficult because of a stigma, because people don't want to be identified as Black because they are being degraded as Black, they are being considered as inferior, etc. They are being considered as some whose ancestors come from the savage space as Africa. So it's difficult, but the good thing is like the civil, kind of civil rights movement. It's not exactly civil rights movement in the sense like the civil rights with Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, but you're kind of strong movement, black movement there that make like stuff are changing. Example, in 1991, you have a kind of affirmative action in Colombia called La Ley 70 de Negritudes. This is the law 70 of negritude that acknowledge black as completely part of a multicultural nation in Colombia. Of course, don't be naive. I'm not saying Colombia became since 1991 a multicultural nation. No, I'm saying just my point is like to show how those movements participate to revamp the way they consider the contribution of African descent in Colombia. The same when Lula came in Brazil, what changed since 2000, he had what they call the quota. The quota is like the affirmative action here. The problem is like the quota was linked to his party. You know, it was not institutionalized in the way like the imaginary as accepted. And I insist on that about the distinction between imaginary and institutional act. Because the imaginary, what is that? Is the way they have been grounding the mind, how you can represent black. So you cannot have all the paperwork on your hand as a citizen of a country, the imaginary is still being colonized. They're still being you as a black, just a black. I want to give one example about precisely, I don't know if you know, because you're a very young student, Henry Gates. You know, he's very well known, the scholar, very well known in the US, very well known outside also. Right after when Obama was elected, there was an incident in Boston. He's a professor at Harvard. He was coming from the travel. Well known, this man. So someone talked about the police officer like he was trying to assault a house. So they arrested him. He was mad. So here, blackness, you see, is not about social class in the representation of the people. It's about how colonially they have been representing black. Although it's socially very well grounded in the US, it's still on the imaginary being black. So to summarize, the one drop rule, yes, is bringing a lot of revolution throughout the world. For instance, today, you won't believe it, but Black Lives Matter is one of the movements that informing the change. You won't believe it, but in France, the Black Lives Matter is changing the movement of black in France. In French, because in France, you just French. You're not black French, you're not Asian French, you're just French. Blacks say, no, we cannot continue like that. Because, I mean, we exist as a black, so we need to be part of the society, and we need to be acknowledged as such. So it's having some influence on that. Thank you.
I just want to, let me just sort of a quick response and really acknowledge such a really great question and observation. I think it's right on. I think tragically, the white one-drop rule was intended to maintain white purity. It had the opposite effect among black people in it, to mobilize all these people who are oppressed. It's a really good point.
Hello, I want to congratulate all the professors, the panelists, Ambassador Mlamula. I'm not undergraduate, but I'm teaching undergraduates on women and leadership in Africa. I'm with the George Washington University, the Institute for African Studies. I don't know whether that would earn me a book, but I did want to thank you, because given my background, I didn't know that rhetoric is a field of study. Because I was talking to one of your colleagues there, that every time an African leader, or even myself, you stand to speak, you always say, oh, it's just rhetoric. These are very good at rhetoric. So it has been quite negative.